make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
Coming up on Arirang News, Japan is planning to start releasing wastewater from Fukushima nuclear power plant into the ocean as early as 1 p.m. on Thursday. South Korea says its foreign ministry will stand ready to file an international complaint if the discharge does not meet safety standards. President Yoon calls for stronger combat readiness by ROK and U.S. forces amid the North's escalating threats. And as part of wider military exercises, a nationwide air raid evacuation drill involving the public was held today, the first in 6 years. South Korea decides to downgrade the infection level of COVID-19 to the lowest, class 4, starting next Thursday. This means the country will manage the disease like the seasonal flu. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We start with Japan's planned release of Fukushima wastewater, which could start as early as tomorrow afternoon. Despite heightening public concern and objections from neighboring countries, an inspection is underway to verify whether the wastewater to be discharged meets safety standards. Our Lee Dae-hyun leads us off.
The discharge of Fukushima wastewater will likely start on Thursday at around 1 p.m. That's according to Japanese news outlet Kyodo News, which reports that the Japanese government and the Tokyo Electric Power Company are deciding on the schedule. An inspection is underway to decide whether the wastewater meets the safety standard when it comes to tritium levels. The Tokyo Electric Power Company on Wednesday said that it has sent 1 ton of wastewater to the dilution equipment late on Tuesday, diluted with seawater to check the concentration levels of tritium. Levels of tritium, a radioactive substance that cannot be separated from water even after applying the advanced liquid processing system, should be below 1,500 becquerels per liter. Kyodo News reports that the result of the test is expected to come out before Thursday, and if the standards are met, TEPCO will release the water as originally planned, and around 460 tons of diluted wastewater will be discharged daily for the next 17 days. Meanwhile, multiple Japanese media outlets report that even after the release, the final goal of completely shutting down the Fukushima nuclear power plant may take a long time. Asahi Shimbun on Wednesday said that the wastewater tank will be removed after the discharging process and the nuclear fuel debris from the power plant will be stored. Around 880 tons of fuel debris is expected to be generated from the plant's 3 reactors. In addition, reports also suggest that the Japanese government hasn't decided on how it will manage a large amount of fuel debris, and measures to prevent wastewater from rain and other means are yet to be put in place. Mainichi Shimbun also said that the radiation levels differ by each tank, and 70% of it does not meet the safety standards, meaning that a complete release may take longer than expected. One of the editorials in the newspaper also advised that the Japanese officials should, quote, face a reality that it's practically impossible for Japan to completely shut down the nuclear power plant by the year 2051. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
Prime Minister Han Duck-soo has told reporters that the foreign ministry will be ready to file an international lawsuit if the Fukushima wastewater discharge doesn't meet safety standards. At a press conference held at a government complex in Sejong on Wednesday, the Prime Minister said the government would request an immediate suspension even if the concentration levels of a single nuclide do not meet the government's standards. He said South Korea will receive real-time data from Japan during the early stage of the release to check the levels of 69 types of radioactive elements, even though 39 among them are currently not being found. Regarding fears for Fukushima seafood, the Prime Minister said the government will come up with all possible measures until the public feels at ease. President Yoon on Wednesday called for stronger readiness against North Korea's growing aggression, combining Seoul and Washington's nuclear and conventional forces. This came as the president dropped by a U.S.-led command post bunker, Command Post Theater Air Naval Ground Operations, or TANGO, to encourage South Korean and U.S. troops currently staging the annual 을지 Freedom Shield combined military exercise. Joined by 9 countries in the United Nations Command, including Australia, Canada, France, Philippines, and Thailand, the exercise aims to bolster their defense against North Korea's increasing military threats. Describing Pyongyang's offensive capabilities as the most serious threat in existence, with the regime's cyber and psychological warfare becoming increasingly digital and diversified, Yoon said the ROK-U.S. alliance must train to deter and punish the regime promptly and decisively. Yoon's visit was the first in 10 years from a South Korean leader. As part of the ongoing 4-day 을지 civil defense exercise in case of a North Korean missile attack, a nationwide air raid evacuation drill involving the public was held today for the first time in 6 years. Our Song Yu-jin was at one of the sites.
For the first time in 6 years, South Korea on Wednesday carried out a nationwide air raid evacuation drill. This to enhance the nation's readiness against potential airstrikes like nuclear missile attacks, cyber intrusions, and drone terror. The same drill was carried out in May, but only at schools and public institutions. This time, it included the general public, except regions designated as special disaster zones due to the impact of this year's heavy rainfall. At 2 p.m. sharp, the country came to a standstill with the blaring of the minute-long air raid warning siren. Citizens swiftly made their way to nearby safety shelters like subway stations and basements.
So out of the more than 17,000 evacuation shelters nationwide, people can find the nearest ones on the Emergency Ready app like this, as well as the standard mobile navigation apps and also the National Disaster and Safety Portal.
To minimize disruption and inconvenience, hospitals, subways, trains, airplanes, and vessels operated as usual. But commuters on subways and trains were required to remain inside the stations for 15 minutes. During this time, they had the chance to learn CPR and take a look at counterterrorism equipment. Drivers were required to park on the side of the road so they could listen to safety instructions through radio broadcasts. For non-Koreans, the Interior Ministry distributed leaflets in 8 different languages at airports, immigration offices, and hotels across the country.
But every month we have like a test of sirens every first Sunday, but it's not like that we have to run to underground. It's like only like a siren and that's it, but nothing like more.
At 2:15 p.m., with the issuance of the guard alarm, people were allowed to leave the shelters, but with a sense of caution. 5 minutes later, the alarm was lifted, meaning that the 20-minute drill came to a close. When the next one will be held will be decided either late this year or early next. Song Yu-jin, Arirang News.
Regarding last week's historic summit between the leaders of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, the U.S. ambassador in Seoul says the security arrangement made at Camp David is not legally binding like NATO, but a political agreement. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji has the details.
The U.S. ambassador to South Korea, Philip Goldberg, says the commitment to consult, which outlines Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo's commitment to coordinate their responses to regional threats, is not a binding agreement. While meeting reporters on Wednesday afternoon at his residence in Seoul, he stressed that Camp David is not a new NATO. He explained that it's not a duty nor a military alliance between South Korea and Japan, but rather a cooperative step where the 3 countries can interact when there are common threats.
So you can think of it more as a political agreement than a legally binding agreement.
When asked if the commitments made at Camp David will last even after elections, he said the interactions that will take place in the next several months will make it an enduring relationship, regardless of the political factors in each country.
It has a very strong commitment from the 3 leaders. In the case of the United States, there's a tremendous bipartisan agreement, of which isn't all that common in our political life, in support of this.
As for the possibility of the second Trilateral summit taking place in Seoul, he said the invitation by President Yoon was well received, but refrained from confirming further details. He also highlighted President Yoon's role in bringing the three countries together by taking forward-looking policies and leadership to improve relations between Seoul and Tokyo. He added that while this relationship is very important to Washington, it depends on the people and the leaders of the two countries, and that it's not something the U.S. can and would resolve. Since taking office in May last year, President Yoon has been working to restore ties with Japan by resolving historical disputes, such as the issue of compensating the Korean victims of wartime forced labor during Japan's colonial rule, before and during World War II. Meanwhile, as for the issue of Japan's plan to release wastewater from the destroyed Fukushima nuclear power plant, the ambassador said the U.S. and South Korea's positions align, adding that Japan has followed the internationally accepted process. 배은지, Arirang News.
The U.S. Commerce Department has removed Chinese entities from its export control unverified list ahead of the upcoming trip to China by its secretary. Beijing is reportedly seeking cooperation with Washington in terms of trade. Our Yoon has more.
U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo on Tuesday ahead of her trip to China next week met with Chinese Ambassador Xie Feng. During the talks, the Chinese ambassador asked the U.S. for increased cooperation and joint efforts to stabilize relations. Last week, the Chinese government stopped the publication of data on its soaring youth unemployment amid concerns that it would reveal new weaknesses in the recovery of its country. China also cracked down on corporate due diligence for firms operating in the country, halting the flow of information to overseas businesses. Accordingly, Jake Sullivan, the White House National Security Advisor, has called on China to be more transparent about the state of its economy, stating that the United States doesn't want the Chinese economy to tumble. Sullivan told reporters in Washington during Tuesday's online briefing that transparency is important as it would help the rest of the world make sound economic decisions. He said that Secretary Raimondo looks forward to constructive discussions with Chinese officials and U.S. business leaders and that the trip is not meant to change China nor the United States. Raimondo's trip to Beijing and Shanghai will take place from August 27th through August 30th. Meanwhile, in a bid to further normalize bilateral trade with China, the U.S. Department of Commerce announced Tuesday local time that it has removed 27 Chinese entities from its export control unverified list. The Chinese Commerce Ministry welcomed the decision, saying that the move is in line with the common interests of the two sides. Yoon, Arirang News.
With the ever-increasing occurrences of brutal crimes in South Korea, the government is considering reinstating the auxiliary police system while restructuring the police force to put out crime prevention as its top priority. They aim to have more officers available around the clock. Kim Do-yeon reports.
Following a series of shocking crimes in South Korea, the nation is reorganizing the police force while bringing back auxiliary police. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo and law enforcement-related ministers addressed the nation on Wednesday morning to lay out major plans for public safety.
We will prioritize law enforcement as a top police duty and reorganize police structures to strengthen capacity. To significantly enhance crime prevention capabilities, we will actively consider the reintroduction of auxiliary policemen.
The auxiliary police was once a mandatory military service option for South Korean men. However, it began downsizing in 2017 and currently has no members. South Korea's chief of police said the plan as of now is to have up to 8,000 auxiliary policemen, which would take around 7 to 9 months, and explained this is to have more officers available around the clock. The Prime Minister also reiterated pushing for life sentences without the possibility of parole for such crimes, while establishing regulations to penalize public threats and possession of weapons in public places. In terms of perpetrators with mental health issues, related policies are being reevaluated, including prevention, early detection, treatment, and daily recovery processes, with the ability of courts to admit people into mental hospitals strengthened. The government is also looking to take care of victims better. One-stop solution centers will be established to provide various forms of support, including legal, economic, psychological, employment, and welfare aid for the victims.
Aiding the victims is very important, and the budget is to be prioritized. Considering our nation spends billions hosting international events, we need to inject plenty of funds to support this.
Lastly, the government is encouraging people to provide more tips to police regarding threats to safety while it pledged to work more with related volunteers. The Prime Minister also pointed out some fundamental reasons for the recent rise in these serious crimes.
Several factors contribute to these heinous crimes, including social marginalization and the proliferation of relative alienation due to the rise of social media.
While this does not justify the crimes, he says the government is analyzing the reasons with experts to come up with measures to fundamentally fix the root of the problem. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Starting from the end of this month, South Korea will downgrade the infection classification level of COVID-19 to the lowest, Class 4. This means the country will no longer count daily figures managing the disease like seasonal flu. Choi Soo-hyung tells us more.
Starting from August 31st, the South Korean government will lower COVID-19's infectious disease level from Group 2 to Group 4. The Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency said on Wednesday that this decision was made due to a decrease in the spread of COVID-19 since the end of June, a reduction in virus risk, overall stable epidemic prevention conditions, and sufficient capacity within the general healthcare system.
The government made the decision to classify COVID-19 as a Group 4 infectious disease by examining those circumstances, and it plans to implement the second stage of measures according to the COVID-19 roadmap announced in March.
Furthermore, the agency stated that although one or two major and minor COVID-19 outbreaks are expected each year, most countries worldwide have already been managing COVID-19 within their general medical systems. The decision means the focus now will shift from counting daily case numbers to protecting high-risk groups. The downgrade from Group 2 to Group 4 means there will be no more daily reporting of confirmed case numbers, which had been going on for 3 years and 7 months. Also, under Group 4, people no longer need to report COVID-19 infections within 24 hours, nor do they need to isolate. Instead, the government plans to operate a more precise monitoring system to observe the COVID-19 trend on a weekly basis. However, the officials said that even with the transition to Group 4, there are still ongoing concerns about new COVID-19 variants.
The greater the number of transmission, the greater the chances of occurrences of yet another new variant. In that regard, we should also keep a close eye on what can come from purely just this high numbers of daily new cases, not just within our nation, but in other countries as well.
The KDCA said that masks will still be required for the time being at infection-vulnerable facilities such as hospitals and nursing homes. Additionally, support for COVID-19 diagnosis and treatment costs, operation of screening clinics, and the supply of vaccines and treatments will still be provided free of charge for now. The government stated that it will manage the epidemic situation in a stable manner going forward. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
The government and the ruling People Power Party today discussed next year's budget, seeking fiscal soundness while strengthening the welfare of the socially vulnerable and parents with newborns. Our Kim Jung-sil reports.
The South Korean government and the ruling People Power Party decided to seek fiscal soundness next year while securing more of the budget for public welfare.
Next year's budget plan is to maintain the spending at a low level by tightening belts, while providing more support for the socially vulnerable and securing public safety to prepare for a better future.
The ruling party said as next year marks the third year since Yoon took office that it's time to give tangible results to the public.
It's important to spend people's tax money as carefully as my own money, especially to support the socially underprivileged.
The government and the ruling party have also decided to raise the monthly financial support for parents with newborns from the current 700,000 Korean won to 1 million won, or around $750. And for children that are 1 year old, subsidies will be raised from the current 350,000 won to 500,000 won, or which is roughly $370. It also plans to cover full tuition fees for children from low-income households and increase the low-interest loans for college students' living expenses to around 4 million won, or about $3,000 per year, up more than 10%. There will also be new 101 care services for those with severe developmental disorders. Financing for regional major businesses was also discussed. Securing a route for the KTX bullet train link from Incheon, as well as an early opening of the GTX-A train in Gyeonggi-do province, were also reflected in spending. The government plans to submit the final bill to the National Assembly on September 1st after a cabinet meeting next week. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
There is an exhibit in central Seoul taking visitors on a journey through the history of Hallyu, South Korean popular culture now recognized around the world. So where did it start and what brought it to its current point? Our Shin Se-byuk takes a closer look.
Where did the Korean wave, or Hallyu, start? A special exhibition entitled The Pop Culture We Loved and Rise of the Korean Wave, currently taking place at the National Museum of Korean Contemporary History in Seoul, sheds lights on the history of Korean popular culture. This focuses on Hallyu's growth within the context of modern history.
We took the global approach because K-pop or drama or movie, they didn't exist our history, Korean history, before the modern and contemporary period. They came from the Western societies and from other parts of the world.
Korean pop culture started back in the 1950s and 60s when American pop culture was introduced in the country. Final records for music and Hollywood movies arrived through U.S. military bases in Korea. The first album of the Kim Sisters, the first Korean female singing group to make their career in the United States, also dates back to this time. From the 1970s, Asian pop culture such as Hong Kong films and Japanese cartoons captivated Korean audiences. For those who lived through the era, the exhibition evokes nostalgia. And for those who didn't experience that time, it offers a fresh perspective.
It brought back some sweet old memories. It's good to walk through the history of the Korean wave.
My parents and I, we each lived in different times. It's fascinating to see how we have these different cultures.
And finally, it highlights how these overseas cultures evolved into the global Korean wave phenomenon.
Here you can dive into Korean pop culture and even take a trip through time with a variety of interactive experiences.
Visitors can listen to vinyl records that were once played on turntables at Sasibong, a famed music venue in Korea back in the 1960s. They can experience idol dance routines alongside young dancers from Europe and Asia. And through AR, they can immerse themselves in scenes from Korean dramas. From singing rooms to creating their own movie posters, the exhibition offers visitors opportunities to become part of the living Korean wave. Beginning its run in July, the exhibition has already attracted over 60,000 visitors. It will remain open until September 3rd. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
Now switching gears to what's happening in the arts sector. The Royal College of Art has partnered with Seongnam Arts Center for a 3-week summer short course in South Korea in 2024. The workshop will be held at Seongnam Arts Center from July 18th to August 7th next year. It'll be the first time for the program to be held outside of the United Kingdom. The course serves as an opportunity for young artists from around the world to learn from the RCA faculty and network with other artists. The RCA is a world-renowned art and design school based in London that has produced world-class artists.
Torrential downpours are set to hammer the country again. This round of nationwide rain is forecast to last until Friday morning. As for the amount of rainfall, severe downpours are expected for Jeju Island with up to 200 millimeters in the forecast. For northern central regions, including Seoul, up to 150 millimeters are expected. Chungcheongdo province and southern regions will see up to 120 millimeters. At times, local downpours of 30 to 60 millimeters per hour may batter some regions. For those across rivers and valleys, please be extra careful of localized flooding. With the rain, though, summer-like heat will temporarily ease off. Rainy spells will dominate for the morning hours. Seoul will be starting off at 25 degrees Celsius. Daytime highs won't be rising too much. Seoul and Busan will peak at 28, Gwangju 29, Gyeongju will be topping out at 30 degrees. And for this weekend, partly cloudy to overcast skies will prevail for Seoul. Nationwide rain will make a return next week. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That brings an end to tonight's newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with the latest news. Good night.
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, who's my way? Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be strong.